All right. Happy Wednesday, everybody. It's midweek, April 22nd. It's Michael with Reconciled, and I have here Chris Macksey with Prefix Accounting sporting the red beanie, and Jacob Schroeder here with Ascend Consulting sporting the nice shirt. And we are here together to give you an update. I know it's been a few days. We haven't had an update, but we're going to give you an update on the stimulus package, the additional money that Congress has passed for PPP funds, for money to hospitals, money to states and cities, and what that might mean for your specific business. So, Jacob, do you want to start us off with a summary of what the Congress passed, and what do we believe we need to still wait for, and what it may mean for businesses?
So I do want to clarify, Congress has not completely passed this yet. It is only the House.
Sorry, the Senate. I meant to say
only,
the Senate.
Yeah, only the Senate. So
I'm
we
a dumb
are
American.
waiting.
The Senate, yes.
We are waiting on the House to pass this. They have not scheduled their vote yet. I'm also going to preface this with saying, when the CARES Act went from the Senate to the House, there were a lot of changes made, and the final version of the bill was different than what was passed in the Senate once it got through reconciliation and everything. So currently the House is trying to decide when they're going to vote. They're trying to decide how they're voting because they're trying to avoid calling everybody back into DC to make that vote. So we're not quite sure when that's going to happen yet. Obviously, for all of you, we hope sooner rather than later. Things to know here, obviously, if you got through in the first round, this really doesn't impact you at all, right? You can't apply again. You can't get additional funds. So if you got money the first time around, you're through. I would actually encourage you to reach out to your lender and ask. I saw some additional notifications coming through today for some people where they had actually gotten an SBA number and their lender had never told them. So they were approved, and their lender, some of these lenders are so overwhelmed, they're just not getting back with people. So before you rush out there and look at for a different bank than you were before, I'd say reach out, see if you can get an answer. So what was passed? So they passed $320 billion for additional PPP funding. In that, they actually set aside some money for smaller banks. So they set aside $30 billion, I think, for banks between $10 billion and $50 billion in assets, and $30 billion for institutions smaller than $10 billion. I find this interesting because all of us touted how well small banks did before. And my guess is small banks probably outlended the big banks before. So it's interesting that they sat aside additional funds for them. I'm kind of curious if they know something the rest of us don't, where maybe the big banks have got their system figured out and they can mass apply into the SBA like right away. But we have no confirmation on that at all. There is also money in here for non-PPP funding. Mm-hmm. So they're bringing additional $50 billion for the EIDL loans back in, and another $10 billion for the EIDL advances, which are grants. We have not heard anything, at least I have not. I'd be curious if you guys have seen anything. Is that enough money to even cover the current EIDL loans that are in the system? Because I know the EIDL shut down long afterward, and they said, well, we have way more applications than we have funding for. Does this even cover what they have? Like, will that open back up or not?
I have not seen any updates on that. And I was surprised to see that they put more money into both of those programs, because I think a lot of people just stopped even applying for those.
Well, they closed it, right? They closed it before PPP ran out. So
that's pretty great. And then $75 billion for hospitals. So if you own a hospital, good for you. And $25 billion for COVID testing. Not sure what that means, except for funding for the states, I guess, for COVID testing.
Yeah. Do you know, is the hospitals only hospitals, or is it all medical institutions?
I have no idea.
Yeah. So that could be an interesting one if you're a medical institution in some sort of doctor's office to look into.
Yeah. But so $320 billion for PPP funding. So the banks, I heard from, I own a few businesses. I got approved on one with the SBA, and still waiting for the loan docs from my bank, but got approved, waiting for the funds. The other two businesses, I got emails from both banks that I've been approved internally by the bank. And the application's ready to submit to the SBA when more funds get approved. So banks are all anticipating more funds being approved. They're all still getting their clients into the queue. And I anticipate that more banks will reopen their application process. I'm seeing emails from fintech lenders and others reopening their application saying, hey, there's more funds that'll be available. Come and apply. So if you weren't able to apply last time, or your bank closed their application, you might want to go recheck the application on the website to see if it reopened to apply for funds. So that's really important.
Or if your bank has not reopened applications and you did not get through the first time, well, I've had some people reach out to me. Well, our bank's not saying they open. I'm going to tell you, go find a different bank.
Yeah.
Because if you're not in line on this one, I'm concerned if you're not in line, right? Unless you're a really small.
There'll be additional funding at all after this.
Right.
I have no idea.
Yeah, and if you applied early and your bank did not get you PPP funds, get a different bank, because there are a lot of people that applied like in the first 2 days and did not get any money. Whereas I had other people that applied in the last 2 or 3 days that did.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and remember, we learned that the E-Tran will kick out an application if another bank has submitted it, right? So if it's already been submitted, E-Tran will kick it out and say this person's already applied. So there is not the same risk as, I don't know where in the stack I'm at this other bank, so I'm going to submit it to a new bank.
Yeah.
At least we don't believe so. Now, I'm also not saying that the SBA hasn't changed and updated their system and made it more wide open so they can process more apps, and that control got removed, which could cause problems in the long run, right? Like, we don't know what those issues would be. Our little disclosure, this is not legal or tax advice.
One of the other interesting things with this next round is that like a couple of fintech companies like Cabbage and Fundera have kind of changed their strategy a little bit. And rather than being the bank, they're just the intermediary collecting all the information and leaving it out for whichever bank wants it. So if you have not used one of those two services, those might be a good option.
Yeah.
As one of the ones that you're using to like throw the spaghetti to see what sticks.
Right. Now those ones are interesting to me because your experience may vary differently from the next person in line, because it's going to depend on what bank you end up with in the long run.
Yeah.
And you have no idea what bank you're going to end up with. So while it's a good choice if you don't have another option because it spreads everything around, that also makes me a little leery, because is Cabbage then going to be the intermediary for forgiveness, or are you going to deal with the bank directly?
Right.
Those conversations haven't happened yet at all.
Right. And the fact that these loans can be sold on the secondary market, that's nuts.
So that's something we haven't talked about at all.
Right.
Having the conversation with the lender, having the relationship with the lender, and understanding, is your lender planning on selling these before forgiveness happens?
Right.
Because who are you going to deal with for forgiveness, right? Like, who are you submitting those docs to? Somebody some bank you've never heard of, right? Like, it could be. So I think that's a real interesting one that is going to play out for sure.
So great. So if you, so again, an update, if you haven't applied for PPP loan or your bank wasn't helpful before, go ahead and you can go ahead and apply again or reapply through another avenue. And you may want to consider a non-bank SBA lender or any of the fintech lenders that have a portal open that have been able to process loans faster. We are seeing now class action lawsuits brought against large banks that basically ordered the priority of the applications to the largest of loans. And we're learning about which banks those are. So that's become a very, very interesting scenario where class action lawsuits have been brought to banks. Banks that did that procedure where they prioritized large loans and they told small loan customers that they weren't doing anything yet, but they actually were, and they were helping these large loans, are now having a slew of class action lawsuits against them. So hopefully we don't wish a class action lawsuit upon anybody or upon you, but Chris is like, maybe we do, but you might want to take stock in the fact that some of these largest of the banks are getting lawsuits taken against them. And most likely, more than likely, we're going to see these settle out of court. Those businesses in the class action are going to get a settlement. Those attorneys are going to get a settlement, and we're not going to hear about them again. And they probably won't admit in the class action to any wrongdoing. So,
Wells Fargo is one of those banks that are named in there, and they did get the world's biggest penalty before. So
yes, they did.
They might make an example of them again.
The interesting thing is, I did see some reports today that there were some banks pulling out of PPP funding for the second round because of the lawsuits, and they didn't want to expose themselves to this. And so as a result, they say, we're not taking on any more risk of dealing with PPP round 2. So that's a really interesting move that I saw. And, because let's be honest, most banks probably shuffled things around, whether it was for their current clients, like even these small banks. You can't tell me a small bank coming in a community, right, is not going to say, like, we're going to take care of our own customers first, and we're going to shuffle those to the top.
And no one's holding anybody against that. No one's saying that.
But at the same time, it's like, if you're a small community bank and the biggest company in town is normally at the other bank and they come to you, you have to know those small banks probably shifted those to the top as well. Right. They're like, yes, we're going to make sure we want this customer's business. We've been courting them for 10 years and we haven't got them to move yet. We have the opportunity to stick it in our competitor's face.
Well, and I also get the logic.
That to the top too, right? Like,
I get the logic too. I get that. Look, the largest loans keep more people on payroll.
Right.
If the whole point is to keep people on payroll and it's indiscriminate on which people, which was, I think, a falsity of the act.
Correct.
It didn't limit it to certain industries. It didn't limit it to revenue impact. It didn't limit it to anything.
No.
Then that is an issue, but it is the reality. So I get it. Why they would prioritize large loans. Secondly, if the system had a limited amount of loans, you want to get the large loans in first because it's less loans to process, right?
Correct.
Otherwise, you ran out of money. So I also get the reason behind it. It's just that's not what it was told to the public in regards.
Right. Yes. The first come, first serve on the public side. And I don't know anywhere in the bill if it specifies that it has to be first come, first serve.
No, I know. I didn't read that anywhere. Yeah.
I'd have to go back to the CARES Act and relook at that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, if this truly is unemployment replacement, which is really what it appears to be when you really read the bill, then it would make sense to do the most people with the least amount of effort, right? From a bank perspective,
right,
as well. And I think part of the problem here is you're seeing, as we said, this bill changed a lot and different people's fingers in it, and they had different intents for different pieces of that bill. And when you mesh them all together, it creates a nightmare, right? Because it's like, well, this piece of the bill was supposed to do this, but this piece down here was all about unemployment replacement. Well, you try to put unemployment replacement and business stimulus in one bill, and they conflict with one another in different areas.
Yeah.
So in one of the interim rulings, one of the questions was, is the PPP first come, first serve? It's a one-word answer to that question, and it's yes.
Yeah.
So in the interim final ruling, it was there. I don't think it was there in the bill, but yeah.
But it's first come, first serve of applications sent to the SBA.
Mm-hmm.
What it doesn't say is this bill is how the bank ought to operate. The bill does not stipulate the bank needs to be first come, first serve. So all it says is it's first come, first serve of the applications coming to the SBA, right? So then you have the issue of the bank, the SBA portal was going up and down. It was getting, it was having a hard time handling the volume.
So, I mean, in that case, it is actually followed because each SBA number, when they got it, is served first. It's supposed to be served first, right?
Right.
There is not in there, is there specific instruction to the lender that they must handle their applications in order to come in, which actually wouldn't make sense because that would actually say, well, this was not a completed application, but it has to go ahead of the person who was a complete, right? Or it's missing one piece. So there has to be some leeway in there as well. So I think that lawsuit is going to spin a lot of wheels, but I also agree they'll probably just settle out of court and just to get it over with.
Right. Make some money. So, all right. Well, that's a great update. The only other piece is we're still getting a lot of questions from people about PPP forgiveness, which I can't believe there's still questions about that. It just seems like it's such a clear thing, but maybe it's not. So common questions we're getting are, I got the funded. Does that mean I have to hire my employees that I had let go today and spend the money on payroll over the next 8 weeks? And then another common question is, and I've even literally seen this question is, well, my employer, so we're seeing it from employees, my employer let me go, I'm on unemployment. Now they're telling me they got this PPP funds, but they want me to come back to work, or they want me to come back to work and only pay me 75% of what I made. So the interpretations of the forgiveness are all over the place. And then I've literally seen customers say, oh, as long as I hire them by June 30th, I can do whatever I want with that money right now. And I'm thinking, okay, no, all of this stuff that you're talking about is not even remotely close to an interpretation of what seems to be fairly clear PPP guidance if you were to sway towards the literal letter of the law. And the literal letter is, you want your employee and your employee numbers, your FTE numbers, and your payroll numbers to be equal or more of your pre-pandemic numbers, or to be equal or more the average monthly that you use to calculate the loan max. That's what you want. And you want to spend that in the next 8 weeks. And that has to be 75% of what you spend. If it goes down, if the payroll numbers and the FTE count goes down compared to pre-pandemic levels, or it stays down because you don't rehire anybody, then you are going to get your loan forgiveness reduced. Period. End of story. That's what the letter of law says. Secondly, it doesn't say you have to hire back the exact same people.
No.
It just says your FTE count. So if you can't get that employee back, you can go hire other people.
So there is a weird piece in here that still needs some guidance.
Yeah.
And that is the 25% reduction in an individual's salary.
Right.
Needs to be restored. So the question that got posed to me was, if we had 9 employees working 10 hours a week before, now we have 3 employees working 30 hours a week. So our FTEs stayed the same, right?
Right.
But we have not restored the salary of those other 6 people.
Right.
What does that impact to?
Yeah.
My gut says you're fine, right? Because they weren't employed before and it wasn't reduced. But by the letter of the law, there's some weird studies in there where they could be like, oh yeah, no, then since you didn't do that, you have to take what they would have made and reduce your forgiveness by it.
Right.
So there are some pieces in there
that are a little weird
to interpretation, right? You know, I've seen some lawyers interpret the 75% spend and say, to get any forgiveness, you have to spend 75% on payroll. Like, not 75% of what you spent, but 75% of your total has to be spent on payroll.
Right.
My interpretation of that, of the application, the Federal Register, just says not more than 25 can be spent on other covered expenses. Not that 75% has to be spent on payroll. Like 75% of the total has to.
Yeah.
But once again, we've already seen where the SBA has issued rulings that don't exactly align to the bill. There is not guidance on some of these things. So most of our guidance here is, it's truly our opinion, right? Our reading of it, our talking with lots of other professionals and their reading of it and come to a consensus. But just because the text says one thing and we come to consensus and all agree that on the text, doesn't mean that the SBA won't come and say something different, right?
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, as we are interpreting it, you know, as long as your full-time equivalent stays the same, doesn't matter the people at all, full-time equivalent numbers stay the same, then the full-time equivalents would not impact that. If they have laid you off before April 26th, they can call you back at any time before June 30th, and it does not impact the full-time equivalent calculation. Now, granted, your payroll dollars would not be in the forgiveness amount because they did not pay you any money, but it does not impact that full-time equivalent calculation.
Yeah.
So, and then total forgiveness, 75% of that total forgiveness needs to be payroll dollars.
Right.
25% could be other expenses.
Right. Or you could spend it all on payroll, right?
Yes.
You could spend it all on payroll. So it's called the Payroll Protection Program. Literally, it's in the title. So assume you get a sway towards spend it on payroll. If you spend it on payroll, you're going to be fine.
Right.
But if
The
you try to use it-
25% is just the incentive for the business owner to get the PPP program in the first place.
Right, right. And also assume wages paid. So assume wages paid. And if it means you need to shift some things to wages paid, shift them things to wages paid, but assume it's wages paid. And don't take the risk of doing another kind of payment to yourself and think it's going to be forgiven. So those are the kind of the guidance we're providing, and telling people to be very conservative about that, and to return whatever remaining funds they have left that they don't want to keep, that they don't want to be a loan, because that way it doesn't turn into a loan and you don't have something that's not forgiven.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 2-year term. So like for most businesses, it's like nobody wants that principal payment.
Right.
I mean, if you have a lot of cash on hand, then that's fine. But like if you don't, which a lot of businesses don't right now, like you're going to come out of this having to deal with that sort of payment is not going to be great for you.
Yeah, because that's over 18 months. So if you had a $180,000 PPP loan, right? You take that even with 1% interest, but over 18 months, you're minimum 10 grand a month, right? Like, can you afford 10 grand a month in loan payment? So you really got to pay attention to what you're spending this on. And also remember, if you do not spend this, if you spend this on unapproved expenses, at the time of forgiveness, they can call that portion of your loan and you could be due immediately.
Yeah.
Now, granted, we have not worked through that forgiveness mechanism. We don't know if banks will do that to people, but there is that language in the bill that it could be called immediately and you have to repay that right away.
That's a big risk. That's a big risk.
Yeah, don't go and spend these on your operating expenses. Just hammering that point home again.
Or your personal bills, or your past overdue bill. I mean, we've said this before. Don't try to pay off the vendor that's been nagging you to get paid. Don't use this money for that. This is for expenses in the incurred and paid for in that time period. So
recommend to that vendor that they apply for the PPP program.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Hopefully we'll have another update when the House approves this and the president signs off. But we'll talk to you guys hopefully tomorrow or later this week. See ya.